Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. We have a live feed right now out of Wisconsin in the George Burch case, the man who was charged with first-degree intentional homicide in connection with the death of Nicole Vanderheiden. Now, what makes this case unique is the fact that the defense is pointing the finger at Nicole's boyfriend, Douglas Dietrich. We have a side-by-side right now of a live view of the courtroom, and it should be noted that Bailey Larson, a forensic specialist, is on the stand. She's the person who processed Greg Matthews' car. Greg Matthew is the friend of Douglas Dietrich, and she took photos of the house and outside and inside, processing evidence. I want to talk a little bit about this case with my fellow host here on the Law and Crime Network, Amy Dash. Amy, good to see you.
Great to see you, Jesse. Thanks for having me.
Amy, it doesn't make sense to me. I see so far the prosecution's putting on their state, and they have to fight two battles here. They have to prove that George Burch did this and disprove that Douglas Dietrich did it. I don't see him as the killer yet, do you?
Well, what evidence is there besides George Burch making up this story that Douglas Dietrich had any type of involvement? Plus, you have friends of Dietrich that were with him that night that corroborate his story. And
let's not forget that he had, when the detective interviewed Douglas, there was no injuries on him. He was wearing his Fitbit, which will be used in evidence. He wore the same clothes he wore the night before to the police. Yeah. If someone who does that, wouldn't they not wear the same clothes? Wouldn't they have injuries? I mean, if he had a struggle with Nicole or had a struggle with George Burch, you would see something like that.
Exactly,
no?
Because he'd want to change his clothes if for any reason there was any type of evidence on him. He would want to get rid of it, right? But what I found was a little bit strange is that he said he woke up around 6:30 in the morning to feed the son, and she wasn't there. Oh. And he wasn't concerned and didn't call the police at that point. That was a little bizarre to me.
Amy, let's not forget, you could say he's the worst boyfriend in the world. There was obviously going to a fight between them, and he didn't call the police until the next day, didn't file a missing persons report until the afternoon. The defense attorney said she was gone for you haven't seen her in 17 hours? That's when you wake up? Just a bad boyfriend or something a little bit more sinister?
I don't see the evidence that it was more sinister, but I don't see how he cared about this woman if she was missing for that span of time and he didn't express concern when he woke up that morning and his son was crying and the mother of his child was not there.
I agree with you. Let's talk a little bit about Nicole Vanderheiden. I want to show a picture of her if we can. Beautiful young mother, taken in the prime of her life. Really a senseless case. Now, the state has said this was a random act of violence. George Burch didn't really know her, was the one who did it. But usually when you see these kind of cases, wouldn't the first target be the boyfriend or the husband? And what makes more sense? Isn't this a common sense kind of case?
But it was. They arrested him initially. And then they had to let him go because they didn't have the evidence. And one of the things that he said in the beginning was, you're making a big mistake. You have the wrong guy. Yes, they think this was random, but just remember, Burch says that he was with her that night.
Right.
It's not like he's denying it. Exactly. And his DNA is all over her.
Well, the evidence here is crucial in this case. And again, right now on the stand is Bailey Larson, a person who has examined some of this evidence. So let's tune in live right now into that Wisconsin courtroom.
Taken in terms of the rest of the home.
This one is southeast.
And that also shows some of the kitchen in the background?
Correct.
And which exhibit number is this photograph?
This is 48.
And what is depicted in that photograph?
Overall of the overall of the kitchen and like dining room area.
And of the last four photographs, were any items of evidentiary value collected in any of those areas?
No.
Did you or the officers observe, you or your other members of your team observe any blood in those areas?
Not that we saw.
If you did observe blood, is that something of evidentiary value you would have collected?
Yes.
And which exhibit number is this, Ms. Larson?
This is 49.
And what is depicted in 49?
It is an overall of the half bath that was across from the laundry room.
And this was in the, which floor of the residence was this?
The main floor.
Yeah, and what is depicted in this photograph that was potentially collected?
There's two tissues on the floor. After being searched, those were found. I was told they were found in the trash can that had red substance on it. and also the green and white shirt that was found on the counter that was originally partially in the sink.
Do you know if those items were collected?
Yes.
Both the tissues and the sweatshirt?
Yes.
Next photograph. And what is depicted in this photograph, Ms. Larson?
Close-up of those 2 tissues that were found on the floor. Well, when I took a photo, they were on the floor.
What
They had
exhibit
red
number is
substance.
that?
50.
And did those appear to have a reddish substance on them?
Yes.
Based on your training and experience, what did that suggest?
Potential for blood.
That's why those items were collected?
Pardon?
That's why those items were collected?
Yes.
Next photograph. And which exhibit number is this photograph?
It's Exhibit 3, which later was actually divided into Exhibit 3 and Exhibit 8. Oh, the photograph's 51, sorry.
Okay, so the photograph is 51.
Yeah.
I hear you mention Exhibit 3. What's depicted in this photograph?
It's a close-up of Exhibit 3, but we later split the 2 tissues into 2 exhibits.
They're exhibits for court purposes. You call them exhibits for your evidentiary purposes as well?
Yes.
Obviously, different numbering system.
Yes.
And the purpose of putting the cone with the number 3 on it, what is that?
It's to mark which item we're on.
All right, everybody, so that's Bailey Larson, a forensic specialist, talking about some of the evidence in the George Burch case. And one of the biggest pieces of evidence is the Fitbit data that will be used to show where Douglas Dietrich was in the night in question. Amy, what do you think about that Fitbit evidence?
I think all of it should be admitted, and it's infuriating that only a limited portion of it is admitted, because if in fact he was sleeping during the time of the murder and the Fitbit can prove that, well then why not admit it?
Well, if you could show maybe where he was, the step counting data, that might be enough. Then again, let's not forget, the detective that took the stand earlier in the day said that he was wearing his Fitbit. Douglas Dietrich was wearing his Fitbit when he interviewed him. He had it on him at all times. Can't wait for that evidence to come in. It is groundbreaking. It is what makes this case unique, and that is why everybody's following it, including us here on the Law and Crime Network. We are going to take a short break, but we have a lot to discuss both in the Burch case and the Donald Smith case out of Florida. You're not going to want to miss anything. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. One of the cases that we are covering is the George Burch case out of Wisconsin. We have a live feed in that courtroom. And right now, who's testifying is a forensic specialist named Bailey Larson. And what she's talking about are that there are photos. She took photos inside of Nicole Vanderheiden, who's the victim in this case. Nicole and Doug, that's her boyfriend, they're home taking photos. And one of the things she noticed was that there was, inside the bathroom, there were some tissues that had blood on them. She also cut out a piece of the master bedroom carpet that appeared to have a stain. So collecting evidence within the home is critical, especially of the victim, and especially when the boyfriend was originally a suspect. But that's not just what we have here, because he's not just a suspect that used to be, because the defense is saying that Douglas Dietrich is the one who committed this crime. I'm here with my fellow host here on the Law and Crime Network, Amy Dash. Amy, the evidence here about the relationship. So we're looking inside their home right now, but one of the key pieces of evidence was the text message conversation between Doug and Nicole the night she went missing. Now, they were pretty heated. They were pretty heated.
Yeah.
I love looking at these conversations when you see these kinds of cases, but how much is this really just a bad relationship, and how much is it maybe Doug wasn't being entirely truthful with the police?
Well, that's a good question, because it shows that there was certainly volatility in the relationship, especially that night, that there was some sort of jealousy. And to your point, it makes you question whether Doug is being completely forthcoming in his testimony, because he seemed to be completely puzzled as to why she would be so angry and so jealous. Yet you see in the context of the text messages that she suspected he was with another woman and that he had been with many other women. And he's acting like this is the first time he's heard these accusations. You can tell that it's so heated that this is probably something that had spurred from maybe him cheating on her in the past. We don't know. But what it shows is that it actually supports Doug in one sense, because it shows that maybe she was so angry that she did in fact go to another bar, that she did in fact run away, as his friends say, and maybe she was trying to get even with him, and that's why she went with George Burch.
Amy, so interesting you should say that. So the jurors don't know yet the theory of how George Burch met Nicole, all they know is, from the defense's opening statement, that George Burch didn't do this and Douglas Dietrich did do this. Now, what we know is the defense is going to start their case once George Burch testifies and explains his story. We know that Nicole ran off, that she was angry, and she was angry because of Doug. Do we really know what happened afterwards?
Well, we know that she was at one bar with Doug. She went to another bar where friends were with her. So we know she went to a second bar. We know she left the second bar, according to the testimony of friends who were with her that night. We don't know whether, in fact, she ended up at a third bar, as is the theory. They say that she met George Burch at a third bar, then they went into her car, and he claims they slept together outside of her house, which seems a little bit odd. Okay, it could go either way. If she's trying to make her boyfriend jealous, then yeah, she's going to bring a man in a car right outside the house so he can see that she's with him. However, you've also got the son in the house sleeping.
Yeah.
So why would she bring somebody home like that?
Listen, I don't want to make light of this situation, but if you're going to be with somebody and you're going to cheat, you're going to do it outside of your house? I mean, everybody was in grade school and was in high school. You don't do it outside your parents' house. This makes it a little strange.
Right, unless you don't really want to be cheating. You just want to bring another man around to make the man that you love jealous. That is something that could have happened if you're looking at the text messages, where you're purely viewing this as revenge sex.
Right. We are speculating a little bit, but it's okay because we're wondering what the defense is going to argue. Again, that is a
Well, that's their theory.
That is their theory. We haven't heard it yet, though. The jurors haven't heard it yet. Now, again, this is Bailey Larson. She's a forensic specialist. This is a live feed in the Wisconsin courtroom, the George Burch case, and he is charged with the intentional first-degree murder of Nicole Vanderheiden. Let's listen into the courtroom now.
Evidence you were directed to take from the Buick, is that right?
Yes.
Now, if I understand it right, your job is to assist in the process and the document and the photograph evidence, right?
Yes.
But you're not directing the investigation, am I right?
Correct.
You went to the Berkeley Street address on 2 occasions, is that right?
No.
No. You went on May 22nd,
Yes.
and that was the only one.
Yes.
And you were directed to collect shoes from that residence, is that right?
Yes.
And you photographed them.
Yes.
And there were a lot of shoes in that house, weren't there?
As far as my knowledge, I would assume so.
Well, right on that picture there were several pairs, weren't there?
Yes.
And what you did is zoned in on the Air Jordans, is that right?
Yes.
And you were directed to do that, is that right?
Correct.
Did you take photos of all the issues?
Overalls, yes.
Did you take them systematically, each side from back?
No.
And if I understand it right, you took many photographs, right?
Yes.
And this was just a small sample?
Yes.
Thank you, nothing further.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, we had a sidebar here that indicated there apparently Ms. Larson's taken more than just these pictures, is that correct?
Yes.
Or many pictures taken, and they may be presented during the defense's case, and therefore it may necessitate you having to testify again, so I'm going to continue the sequestration order.
Okay.
All right, so you're not released at this time, but you may step down.
Okay.
Okay. And this will be our time for a break. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be back at 20 to 11.
All right, so they're going to a break in Burch, but that's okay because we have another huge case that we're covering here. It is the Donald Smith case out of Florida, the man who was, I don't even have to say accused, he was convicted of kidnapping, raping, and murdering a beautiful 8-year-old girl named Cherish Periwinkle. We have a live feed in the courtroom, and right now, the defense is delivering their closing arguments about why they say Donald Smith doesn't deserve the death penalty. Let's listen in.
And ultimately, it's up to each of you individually to determine what is appropriate. And we go back to the fundamental question.
All right, so that is the defense attorney arguing for her client, Donald Smith, a convicted child rapist and murderer, about why he should not be sentenced to death. Again, I'm here with our fellow host on the Law and Crime Network, Amy Dash. Extremely difficult case. I wouldn't want to be in her position to argue for him.
Yeah, but it's always laughable, Jesse, when she's talking about the morality of putting somebody to death who was convicted for abducting and raping and brutally murdering an 8-year-old. Where was the morality in what he did to that innocent little girl?
Exactly. Where was that? And I think it's interesting because each one of those jurors said before the trial started, I can have an open mind. All right? I have an open mind about his guilt or innocence, and I have an open mind about whether or not I can sentence him to death. So which begs the question, this is a case that's prime for the death penalty. Unless you had a juror who said, really in the back of their minds, I can never really sentence anybody to death. Because if you can't, that's one thing. But if you could, wouldn't this be the perfect case to do it?
Yes, and if you had a juror like that, the person would probably be voted off because we know there are a certain number of vetoes. But on the other hand, they had a hard time finding jurors to even take this case because people were so impassioned against him immediately without hearing any of the evidence. But the fact that he was convicted within 14 or 15 minutes, I think makes this entire process moot. I think these people are definitely going to sentence him to death.
You believe that?
Yes,
100%.
because they convicted him like in less than a half an hour.
You think they're going to come up back with a verdict pretty soon for that when they're finished up here?
100%. I think it'll be just as fast.
The argument that this is impulse control versus you had a choice, and the defense is going to say that he has such a psychological illness, he's a sick pedophile, couldn't control his actions, doesn't have impulse control. But at the same time, he knows what his triggers are. His triggers are young children. His triggers are cocaine. He hung around kids and he did cocaine. Isn't this a choice?
Well, there are people who have fixations and there are people who have sicknesses and there are people who are perverts who do not act upon them. So you can make the argument that he couldn't control his impulses, but if that's the case, then he shouldn't walk this earth if he's going to attack children. He should not be free, and because of what he already did, I don't think we should spend money keeping him in a prison.
Yeah.
He took this poor, innocent little girl, he preyed on the most vulnerable person in our society, a sweet, beautiful little girl. Because he's a sicko, I don't even want to waste my time pontificating on whether he could control his sick impulses or not. He committed the crime. He's guilty. I think he needs to be put to death.
Let's not waste any more time. Let's listen to the defense now, again, trying to defend their client about why he doesn't deserve the death penalty. Let's listen in.
What Mr. Smith's life has been. And we can't escape the fact this is a man who has walked around his entire life with brain damage. Dr. Wu actually presented to you these slides. Donald Smith also has almost triple the number of white matter hypointensities as normal. The odds of this occurring by chance are 1.7 in million. This second white matter abnormality occurs in profound neurodevelopmental disorders with impaired social interactions and empathy and with abnormal fixated obsessions. As you heard Dr. Wu explain, this is not something Donald Smith can control. This is not something Donald Smith ever chose. This is who he was. This is who he is. And it's degenerative, meaning it progresses and gets worse. What ends up happening as you go through this process is Mr. Smith sits vulnerable, exposed. All of his life's, and I won't say accomplishments, because quite frankly, he doesn't have any, were displayed for all of you all to see. And Mr. Khalil and the state may argue there's not a single piece of mitigation in regards to that. His prior record isn't mitigation. Ladies and gentlemen, I beg to differ. For it shows a man who has struggled his entire life with an inability to be a functioning adult. I think his childhood, as you heard from Dr. Butler's testimony, could best be summed up as cementing his feelings of abandonment and essential worthlessness. No, he didn't struggle for where the next meal was coming from, but he struggled and starved for attention. And why? Because his brain can't connect with people. His brain doesn't allow it. You heard Dr. Holmes, Dr. Sesta tell you in no uncertain terms, this is a man who back in the 70s, when he was just a mere 19 years old, is diagnosed as antisocial and a pedophile. He's somebody that can't have normal.
Defense attorney trying to say that Donald Smith is the victim, that he's been suffering his whole life. Amy? I think that explains it right there.
Oh my gosh, that he's vulnerable. Who on earth would feel sorry for this monster? One of the psychologists that testified for the defense went on the stand during this phase and said that he is one of the most dangerous sex offenders that the psychologist has ever encountered. And on top of that, Monster Smith over here blamed killing poor little 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle on Cherish Periwinkle, saying, oh, well, she climbed into my van and I'm a convicted sex offender, so I had to kill her.
I really wish we could make this stuff up. I really wish we could make this stuff up, Amy, but we can't.
How does she say it with a straight face, though?
That's her job. That's her job. We're going to go to a quick break. When we come back, we're going to go right back into the Donald Smith courtroom. You're not going to miss anything. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. And speaking of live, we have a live feed back in the Florida courtroom, the Donald Smith case, where the defense attorney is really making the argument to the jury why her client, Donald Smith, should not be sentenced to death. Let's listen in.
Without the suicidal thoughts going through his mind. How to exist. And on June 9th, 2013, he actually, and he had done it before in 2011, you'll have these records, to recognize that he needed to be institutionalized. You heard from Dr. Holmes, and it's not pretty, it's uncomfortable. This is a man who, when she first met him, fully and blatantly explained, I'm a pedophile, I'm just sick of denying it. I'm just sick of denying it. Because he was an addict in 2013 who hit his absolute rock bottom. And Cherish Periwinkle paid the price. But he was a sick man who did that. And it's not an excuse. We will all feel more comfortable knowing that he will not walk amongst us again. And I suggest to you further reflection that he never existed as a functioning human being. There were no stories of vacations or getting that first job, getting promoted, filing taxes, saving up to buy a new couch, saving up to buy a new car. None of that. Because he was a man who struggled daily with brain damage and drug addiction, and pedophilia and antisocial behavior. Severe mental illness. He missed out on all of those things. And instead of photographs of him living life, we have photographs that clearly show when he wasn't in a literal jail cell, when he wasn't confined, he was living with the torment of imprisonment of his own mind. The neurological evidence in this case is uncontroverted and tells you everything you need to know in regards to who Donald Smith is and his battles. And it doesn't change, ladies and gentlemen, the fact that Cherish Periwinkle is gone because of him. What we've had since that horrible day is Donald Smith confined. Fully, absolutely isolated. And the one thing that was so telling was his own son's testimony in regards to, now that he's confined and he's been forced into sobriety and he's been forced into confinement and isolation, I can finally start to have a relationship with him. Donald Smith, through this process, through all of these people examining him and reading reports about himself, has finally been able to confront his own demons of knowing that his brain does not work correctly, of knowing that these horrible urges that would overtake him were because of the brain damage. And that doesn't excuse them. We are in a criminal court for a reason. We are talking about punishment for a reason. But no matter what your verdict today, it doesn't bring Cherish back. And the easy thing to do is, as the state urges you, is to seek revenge. Revenge does not make our society better. I say to you, ladies and gentlemen, would killing Donald Smith make this world a better place? Would it make our human heart softer? Or will it make it harder? If the state that I live in, that we all live in, our society, is not kinder, more intelligent, more humane than the horrendous acts that Donald Smith committed, then I suggest we live in a difficult, difficult world. More and more, we have seen just in recent history the aftermath of unchecked mental illness. Just in the past week, we've had an instance of what appears to be horrible mental illness without the appropriate remedy. And the remedy for Donald Smith, as you heard from Dr. Sesta, who I agree told you with no uncertain terms, confinement was the only appropriate remedy for Donald Smith. And he even tried to do it to himself. And the one thing about mental illness in regards to the state's argument, when they talk about a conscious decision, you don't turn mental illness off. You don't wake up and say, I'm not going to be struggling with these urges that overtake me every day. You do not suddenly wake up one day and say, the crack addiction that I've become so accustomed to because I can't handle these mental thoughts within my mind, I'm just going to simply stop. The only remedy was confinement. And as Dr. Sesta said, the tragedy here is he had been. As we go through this process, and as you truly weigh what is in your hearts and minds, I suggest to you the following. The quality of mercy is not strength. It falls from the heaven like a gentle rain to the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It is blessed by the person who gives it, and it is blessed by the person who receives it. Mercy is above that scepter of power. It is an attribute to God himself, and earthly deeds most resemble.
Your Honor, I would object. It's inappropriate to bring religion into argument.
If you want to rephrase.
Earthly deeds are at their best when mercy is given. Mercy is something you give, even when someone doesn't deserve it. Why is Donald Smith worthy of your mercy? Because of his inherent flaws that have been exposed to you, uncontroverted, the mental illness he has struggled with his entire life. An even more awesome power than death is the power of life. And as you go through this process, and the verdict will be lengthy, and it will bring up each circumstance that was brought to your attention, and you have to consider that. But again, if you marked no to every single one of the mitigating circumstances that have been brought out to you.
Would killing Smith make the world a better place? That's the defense attorney right there arguing for her client. Amy, would the world be a better place?
You don't even have to finish the question. Yes, it would make the world a better place. And this defense attorney could literally win an Academy Award, because what she did is she brought a remorseless rapist to tears.
She did.
With her poetic justification about why the biggest monster on earth should be given mercy, even though he showed no mercy to an 8-year-old, an innocent little 8-year-old that he raped and brutally killed.
You mentioned it during the break. He's not crying for Cherish.
Oh, no.
He's crying for himself.
Yes, the one time that we see this monster cry is when she talks about how he's the victim. That's how you know that he's the biggest narcissist on earth. And that's how you know that throughout the whole trial, when all of the sordid details were coming out about how he killed this little girl, how he raped this little girl, and all of the family members were there crying and heartbroken over the loss of this child, he didn't shed any tears, only for himself.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Amy, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Jesse.
So we are going to wrap things up here on the Crime and Investigation Network. We thank you so much for joining us. Amy's going to be joining, though, on the Law&Crime.com. That's where you can watch the continuation of the Donald Smith case and the George Burch case out of Wisconsin. You can follow both of them on Law&Crime.com today. We're going to continue our coverage right after we sign off here on Crime and Investigation. Amy's going to join. She's going to be the host for the day. We're going to have a good day?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm going to continue to rip on this guy and talk about how he should be electrocuted.
Please do.
So please tune in.
Please do. These are two very, very important cases that we're covering here. We will be back tomorrow on Crime and Investigation at 9 a.m. It should be noted that in the Burch case, we believe the state will rest on either Monday or Tuesday of next week. Smith, we might get a verdict later today. We might get it tomorrow. You're not going to want to miss anything. That's what we do here on Law and Crime Live. We cover each case gavel to gavel with full in-depth analysis. We thank you so much for joining. It's been a big day, important day.
Great job.
And we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. Have a great day.